What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and you guys were asking me to cover the new Marvel Zombies. So that's what we're going to cover here. Now, this is a little bit different than the Marvel Zombies that you're used to. And honestly, I think it's better because this is actually 3 stories combined into one. So what this does is it initially picks up with Daredevil. And while we don't know exactly how the zombie outbreak started, things aren't necessarily, it's not like an end of the world type story. Instead, at least this part is done in the form of like a kind of fighting ring where basically people or zombies are fed to like Daredevil. And Daredevil like attacks the other zombies and basically takes these other zombies out. And people bet on it and that kind of a thing. It's sort of cool, right? But it's a little bit different because they kind of torment him a little bit and then kind of stick him back into a hole. And so it's one of these things where humanity has just kind of found a way to use zombies even for their own personal benefit. And of course, once Matt Murdock is thrown back into the hole, these just like pieces are thrown in there for him to essentially feast on. But here's where things get a little bit different. So in the traditional Marvel Zombies mythos, assuming we leave out the most recent version they did, which was absolutely awful, but you look at like the old Robert Kirkman Marvel Zombies from back in the day, they were zombies, but they were still themselves. The difference is that they just really wanted to eat flesh, right? So Spider-Man was very much like the Peter Parker that you know, except he was using his veins as webbing, which was really gross, and he was still kind of cracking jokes. With this, it's really more grounded, and it's a little more visceral, in the sense that with Matt Murdock as a zombie, he kind of recollects on his own past. So he still seems to kind of have an idea who he is, even if it's only some kind of distant memory on a far shore. But it's like these quotes that kind of come back, right? Oh my God, thank you. They were going to kill me. Do I don't know what to me. If you hadn't, I can't believe this. I mean, they would have sued us out of existence. So it's one of those things where he kind of recollects on the positive impact that he had on the lives of people. And you kind of get this thing where as he's consuming this stuff, he just kind of looks down in what seems like a moment of sadness. It's very much to interpretation, right? Now, this story with Matt Murdock is actually written by Garth Ennis, and Garth Ennis is really good when it comes to capturing like the essence of a character in a really sad moment. The other part of this is, of course, no Garth Ennis story would be complete without like the Punisher. And the reason for this is because even when you have Matt Murdock kind of recollecting on his own past, he also thinks about like the horrible things he's done as a zombie, the terrible things he's done to other people, attacked them, killed them, different things along those lines. And so what you end up getting is that while you have these kind of guards or henchmen or whatever, who are the ones that are like sticking him in the hole, this guy kind of comes out of nowhere, right? And he says, "It's Frank Castle. Do you remember me?" And he says, "I heard they had you here. I can finish it for you now if you like, or I can turn you into a walking bomb. And tomorrow you can take those animals with you. Understand?" And so this is a really cool element, because one of the things to know is that Garth Ennis, this guy has Punisher on lockdown, and he has ever since like the old Punisher stories from Max, right? Up is Down, Black is White, the Slavers. Oh my God, the Slavers was amazing. When he set the guy on fire in front of the camera and then looked into it and said, "Don't come back." Like just those crazy moments from Punisher Max. It was mind-blowing, some of the stuff that happened. But Punisher is still going to be Punisher regardless of the circumstance. His war against anybody who takes life or commits crimes above a certain threshold, they gotta go. So Punisher is always going to do that. And that's why he looks at these guys who, in a lot of ways, are kind of abusing Daredevil, if we're really gonna put a word to it. And he's just kind of like, we're going to take these guys out. But instead of me being the one to do it, I can kind of help you get the revenge that you're looking for, right? Because even though you're a zombie, you're still in there somewhere. And so what he does, at least what Frank Castle does, is he takes out the 2 guards that have previously brought him down. And then these other guards end up coming in to basically grab Matt Murdock and then take him up to where he's supposed to be. And that while he's there, you end up finding out that Frank Castle has literally filled him with explosives. He was literal when he said, "I will turn you into a bomb and detonate you." That's exactly what happens, because Daredevil lets out this kind of scream. That's the signal to Frank Castle, who basically activates the bombs within inside Daredevil, blows them up, and kills everybody in there. And like, that's the end of the Daredevil story. It's dope. It's really really, really cool. So it's like a lot of little mini stories that kind of come together to sort of tell this almost anthology series about like Marvel zombies, just depicting them differently. And so the next one switches over to Spider-Man. And this one is actually probably one of the best Marvel Spider-Man zombie stories that I think I've ever read. Because what we get is this really just amazing monologue with his character. There's not a whole lot of dialogue between himself and anybody else. It all takes place within the span of about 5 to 10 minutes, if that, right? It's just a very, very confined situation. And he says, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. It's the New Yorker in me, learned it from my Aunt May. Don't give up, she'd always say. There's always hope. I felt this in the darkest, bleakest situations. I've battled power-mad demigods, maniacal goblins, the devil himself, but even in the face of unspeakable odds, hope remained, because if we don't have hope, what's left? And so in this scenario where zombie outbreaks kind of just exploded onto the scene, Spider-Man is basically trying to hold them off as best he can so that like J. Jonah Jameson and those guys can essentially escape. And J. Jonah Jameson isn't really chastising Spider-Man at all, right? He's not really giving him a hard time, right? It's just one of these things where it's kind of like these statements that are coming in, right? The city is completely overrun by these monsters. Pandemonium is the word, and I shudder to think it's just these small little tidbits, right? These small little radio blips that are kind of coming in and so on and so forth, right? But even through all of that, Spider-Man says, even with my mask on, the stench of death is overpowering. I keep waiting for it, for that glimmer of hope. Instead, I see more of them. They just keep coming. Now, this is one of the reasons why I love this so much, is because instead of it feeling like the traditional Robert Kirkman Marvel zombie stories, which this is going to sound like a very ironic statement considering that Robert Kirkman was the one who wrote it, it feels like The Walking Dead meets Marvel zombies, especially the Spider-Man story. If any of you guys ever read like the original Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman, it was very similar to this, both in terms of artistic style as well as like how the characters were written. And in fact, there was no color in those old stories. They were just 100% black and white the way that they were done. But in the midst of all this, Spider-Man has this instinct to like leave, right? To run. And it's one of those things where he just kind of stays behind, right? Even J. Jonah Jameson's panicked voice sends a chill right through Spider-Man, because Jameson's never the guy to panic, right? He's never the guy to like freak out and start losing his mind. If anything, his fear gets replaced with anger. And so he just kind of becomes angry and starts lashing out. And he says, I'm spent, running on instinct, but I'm their only chance. I think about Aunt May, about Mary Jane. I pray they're okay, that they've somehow gotten to safety. And that's when he realizes one of the zombies that's running towards him is Betty Brant. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Betty Brant, and in fact, it's explained really, really well here, Betty Brant both worked at the Daily Planet, but more significant than that, she was the first real love interest of Peter Parker in Marvel Comics. Before Gwen Stacy, before Mary Jane Watson, there was Betty Brant. She was the old school girlfriend. And while the two of them ended up going their separate ways, they became incredibly good friends in Marvel, to the point that there were even instances where there were things going on with Peter Parker that he would confide in Betty Brant, and he wouldn't talk to Gwen Stacy or Mary Jane Watson about those things, because seemingly only she would really understand. Their relationship transcended any kind of romantic involvement and had become something much, much more. And so in the face of all this, he realizes it's not Betty Brant though, right? It was Betty Brant once upon a time, but it's not her anymore. And he overcomes this desire to keep himself from attacking her by literally taking her out. But in the midst of all of that, he's radioing in to the Avengers, right? To Captain America, to Iron Man, to anybody out there, but all he's getting is just kind of a buzzing sound. There's no one there. As far as he's concerned, when it comes to the superhero community, he's an Elmo, the last man on Earth. And so it's kind of nuts, because once he starts to realize what's going on, or at least seemingly there is no help coming, hope kind of begins to fade a little bit. But as J. Jonah Jameson and his guys are kind of making their way out, then it's just sort of like, okay, I'll hold them off a little bit longer and then I'll join you, only for him to be met with Aunt May. That Aunt May had turned into a zombie and Aunt May is about to attack him. And that's the crazy thing here, is because what she says is like, where is he? Where's Peter Parker? What have you done with my nephew? Because seemingly Aunt May doesn't know that Peter's Spider-Man. And so it's a really cool element here. And it kind of feeds into this idea that yes, they're zombies, but they're also still kind of the people that we know. And in fact, she even says like, what have you done, right? Like, I always knew you were dangerous, that you'd hurt my nephew. He's such a frail, nice boy. And so she's attacking him in every sense of the word, right? And even gets like a bite in on him. And so once he initially goes to try to attack her, he realizes he can't. It's his Aunt May, right? It's like the one person that he has left in the world that's like a parental figure for him. And in fact, she might as well be his mom, despite the fact that she was his aunt. It's not as easy to just attack her and take her out. And this is cool because it moves Spider-Man away from just being like the guy with the mask and like the sense, the spider sense that lets him like dodge attacks and swinging around and is the focal point of two of the greatest video games ever made in the history of humanity. Instead, he's just a guy, he's a human. And who among us would be able to so easily kill our loved ones in a moment of panic if some kind of zombie apocalypse happens? We would be in this exact same situation, right? We would panic, we would be scared, we'd be torn, right? We'd be emotionally caught up in the situation. And so what he ends up doing is removing his mask and showing his identity to Aunt May. And Aunt May is like, oh my God, I can't believe it's you. What have I become? She becomes lucid, right? She goes back to her normal self and she's like, please take me out, end my suffering here. And Peter does. He ends the suffering of Aunt May. Here's the kicker to all of this, is that J. Jonah Jameson and all those guys are watching all of this unfold. And even when J. Jonah Jameson realizes it's Peter Parker, and he realizes Peter had to take out his Aunt May and so on, there's a very human connection that comes from Jameson where he reaches out to Peter and he says, come on, Web Menace, get in here. You don't need to pretend to be a hero anymore. The response of Spider-Man, Jonah, please run for your life, because Spider-Man just turned into a zombie. Now, that's the end of the Spider-Man comic. That's the end of the Spider-Man one. And so what this does is it switches to about almost 1 year after the zombie outbreak happened. And even though it wasn't actually drawn by him, this one with Moon Knight looks like it was drawn by Liam Sharp. And the reason why I say that is because Liam Sharp just has a really, really difficult to appreciate art style. It's all just an amalgamation and an amorphous blob of like characters and surroundings just combined into a comic book panel. It makes it a hassle. But this whole thing with Moon Knight is actually dealing with both him and the moon god Khonshu. Now, Moon Knight says the last of the survivors should reach Zone C by morning. The response of Khonshu, good. We can then be done with this city. So what seems like has happened here between the initial outbreak that took place and this moment here, humanity has set up safe zones. Humanity set up safe spots in different places, both around the city of New York and most likely even the rest of the country and the world. Again, it's one of the cool elements about this story is we don't know how far reaching it is, and we don't know how much of society has collapsed. But the response of Moon Knight is we have to help these people, Khonshu. And Khonshu's response is we have to help all travelers of the night. We've stayed too long. Now, that's one of the important things here, and that's where the relationship between the two seems relatively interesting, because 9 times out of 10, Khonshu's involvement when it comes to Mark Spector is usually one of manipulation. It's one of getting him to do Khonshu's own bidding and not really caring about the nature of Mark Spector. And in fact, if I remember correctly, during Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight run, probably one of the greatest runs of all time, we actually ended up learning the motivation behind Khonshu and choosing an avatar on Earth is to basically drive that person insane, destroy their identity, quote unquote, hollow them out, so that Khonshu himself can take over their body and then function on Earth. So he never really had any actual love for Mark Spector. Him being an avatar for Khonshu is just a means to an end. So the two never quite saw eye to eye. But what's interesting here is Khonshu appears more like a mentor than anything else, right? Like when Khonshu says that we've stayed too long, Moon Knight responds in saying, and I say we haven't stayed long enough. And where Khonshu responds in asking, you still do not trust me, Moon Knight says, of course I don't. When have you ever had my best interests in mind? And he says, no, you promised you would help me fix this. And that's when Khonshu says, we are not alone. Now, seemingly, there was nothing that Khonshu could do. And the reason why I say that is one of the things to understand when it comes to Khonshu is that within the godly pantheon, the kind of hierarchy that exists out there, Khonshu is an earthly god, a new god, if you could call him that. He's by no means on par with a cosmic entity. He's more in line with maybe kind of Odin, at least if only in like a ceremonial role, certainly not on the same level of power, right? He's more comparable to like the Panther goddess Bast or something along those lines. What's seemingly happening here is well beyond Khonshu's ability to basically fix. Galactus probably could, right? Which would make a really interesting scenario. I mean, technically, Galactus didn't do anything to stop it in the original Marvel Zombies, and in fact, he got consumed. But presumably Galactus could do something about it, right? Manipulating the power cosmic and being able to create life, destroy life, yada, yada, yada. He could just wipe out the whole of the Earth and then restore it and make things back to the way they were before, and like, that would basically be it. But what's going on here is that while they are not alone, the reason for that is because Iron Man shows up here, and Iron Man immediately starts going after Moon Knight. But you end up finding out that Iron Man is the avatar of Anubis on Earth. That while Anubis is not seemingly the source of this zombie outbreak, or if he is, he doesn't really say it explicitly on the nose. He is using it as a kind of excuse, right? A chance to make his move and to take over Earth. And so the fight between Moon Knight and Iron Man is pretty intense. And in fact, Anubis even says, this virus is a gift. You will see that, Khonshu, but first, I needed a way to prevent you and your vessel from interfering. Fortunately, I found an undead host more than willing. Of course, that person being Iron Man. And of course, Khonshu says, "End this now, Mark," and the two of them kind of start going back and forth. Now, of course, Moon Knight kind of gets the upper hand on Iron Man to a degree, right? Like slashing at him with one of his moon daggers or, you know, moon rangs, whatever you want to call it. And then in turn, Iron Man's kind of like, "Hey, Anubis, they don't need all their limbs to be zombies, right? As long as the virus spreads, I get a free pass to do anything I want." And so in turn, he says, "Unfortunately for you," and then he rips somebody's arm off, and it's kind of hard to tell who he is. It's hard to tell if it's like Anubis, right? It's not Moon Knight, because like Moon Knight has his arms, right? Like his arms are there. He's just kind of laying there with his arm attached to his body, right? So I don't really know whose arm got ripped off. But what's kind of nuts here is the response of Khonshu is, "Get up, Mark," right? And that's when Mark says, "The virus is spreading. I can't think straight. I'm going to die. They're going to die," right? Mark Spector is succumbing to the very virus that's been infecting everybody. And then Khonshu in turn replies, "When have you ever needed your mind, my son? Faith has never needed rationality. Trust in my guidance." And that's when like this random guy out there is just kind of like, "Please don't kill me." And the response of Iron Man is, "And who's going to stop me," right? Moon Knight jumps in, attacks Iron Man, and then just beats this guy to death, right? Like just absolutely crushes him. And that's when Khonshu's like, "My son, my vessel, you've listened well. You must be hungry. Do not worry. Who am I to deny my avatar?" And in fact, this innocent guy in an alley is fed to Mark Spector by Khonshu. And Khonshu in turn says, "We will soon run out of your former allies to consume, but I can indulge you for now. I am a merciful father, but you must listen to me. Can you do that, my son? I will soon rebuild you in my image, but for now, finish this." So in effect, now Moon Knight is Khonshu's avatar on Earth in a zombie form, attacking all the zombified superheroes that exist out there in the world. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end, right? It's only the first issue. There's gonna be more that come out of this, but it's really, really cool. Let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments section. I'm really curious, but I will catch you all later. Peace.